time for Crue Trime! Hi guys, welcome back in today's episode of
Crue Trime.
Crue Trime. Crue Trime? We are talking about the shotgun stalker. Stick around. If you are new here, welcome. I don't know how you found me, but I'm glad you did. So what we are doing here is I am talking about true crime if you're boring. It's Crue Trime if you're me. And I'm gonna put makeup on at the same time. It's a weird combination. I know. We've already agreed that we like it, so here we are. Look at it's little dancing Lydia's all down my sleeve. So cute. Okay, so you guys know that I like to kind of tell a Crue Trime story that maybe I have some sort of connection to, even if it's sort of a reach. So I got a DM from a very sweet subscriber named Sheryl. Hi, Sheryl. And she said, I know that you've covered the DC Sniper, but there's another case that's earlier than that one called the Shotgun Stalker. Have you heard of this? And I said, no, I have not. I'm intrigued. Tell me more. And then she said, I have first-hand witness knowledge. Let me know if you want to talk. I just sort of Googled the case, you know, no offense to Sheryl, but just to make sure that it was like a real thing and not just like a, I don't know, weirdos on the internet, man. So I looked up the case. It's very, very interesting. And then we exchanged a couple DMs and we actually even had a very awesome phone call. People talking on the phone in 2020. What even is that? I don't know. So we'll get to Sheryl's part of the story when we get to it, but let's get started. Okay, so Washington, D.C. in 1993. The crack epidemic was in full swing and D.C. was like the murder capital of the United States. Things were so bad in DC that even the mayor had gotten involved in some scandals, some drug scandals, and he spent some time in prison. Good old Marion Barry, rest in peace. At this time, 1993, had just been released from serving some time in prison about a year before, which, side note, he was elected again in 1994 to serve a fourth term. People love a comeback story, am I right? Anyway, Washington, D.C. in 1993 was a very, very different place than it is today. Poverty, drugs, crime, gangs, homicide, it was rampant. But in early 1993, there was a threat of a very different kind. So for 2 months, a person was driving around the city, leveling a shotgun outside of the driver's side window and shooting at people. Random people. Okay, I know that sounds familiar, you know, DC Sniper, but this was different because this predates that case and all of these shootings happened inside the city limits. So there was no apparent motive, no connection between the victims, no witnesses, no pattern. So like I said, this case I'd never heard of, right? But it was recommended to me by a very sweet subscriber, Sheryl, because her roommate was the first person who was targeted. So little baby Sheryl, she's a young professional and she moved to DC in like mid to late 1992 and found a place to live in Columbia Heights. In Columbia Heights, it's a neighborhood in Northwest DC. It used to be super sketchy, you know, depressed, not good. It was not a good neighborhood. It's actually now home to some of the best restaurants in the city. It's quite bougie, actually. Sheryl had just moved there a couple months before, and she was living that young professional bohemian life, you know, working a great job, making great money, but not really having any real bills. So her roommate, her name was Robin, and she was, at the time, you know, was just, you know, a drunk. It's sort of dramatic. Sorry, Robin. So on the night of February 23rd, 1993, Robin ran in, breathless, and screaming,
"Oh my God, I just got shot at!"
And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, Robin. Anyways, so Robin was walking alone on Homeade Place at Monroe Street and saw a gun barrel appear out of the window of a moving car, and then a shot rang out, which missed her, obviously, and lucky for her. She called police, she told them what happened, and they didn't give her the idea that they believed a word she said, right? They dismissed the claim as like teenage vandals running around with a BB gun. In my research, I learned that as police were taking the call with Robin, this person, this shotgun stalker, shot somebody else a couple blocks over. They just didn't know at the time that they were connected. So on Oak Street, a short distance away, a 22-year-old man was walking alone and he had been shot in the head. He lived, but he was seriously injured. He ended up losing an eye and much of the use of one arm. But because he was young, male, black Metro Police Department just wrote it off as typical crime for that area. Remember, it was a bad neighborhood. They just thought it was like an ordinary drug dispute. And also, he was supposed to start the next day a job in a nursing home. Okay, he was not a gangbanger. And police didn't connect the two events at all, even though they had happened so close together. Time-wise and distance-wise, they didn't connect them until, a month later. About 3 days later, on February 26th, a man with a shotgun burst into a barbershop and fired it upon a 58-year-old man named Julius Jack Bryant as he sat in the barber chair. He obviously died from the gunshot, and Metro Police Department again just dismissed it as more neighborhood gang warfare. 2 weeks after that event, another pedestrian was shot on Holme Place. This time it was a 43-year-old man, name unknown, who was shot in the head but lived. Police again blamed drug crimes, gang stuff. Just a bad neighborhood. That tells you how bad it was in DC at the time. Like, there was this many shootings happening, this close together, in that same neighborhood, and the cops were like, well, it's just bad over there. So it took all of those shootings to happen like that before the police started to kind of connect them, right? After every shooting, Robin, the first victim, she would call the police and tell them.
That's the same guy who shot at me.
And they were like,
Thank you. Bye.
there's not really a pattern, but there is kind of common factors, right? So this shooter is only attacking people who are alone at night, typically. So the neighbors would pair up to stay safe. Even the extracurricular professionals, right? So Sheryl was telling me, even the neighborhood friendly drug dealer, you would think he's just maybe hitting on you like, hey, where you going, girl? No, what he really meant was,
Where are you going? Alone. Do you need an escort? I will escort you.
it's kind of nice. I saw an interview with a former police officer at that time who said that the people in those neighborhoods were so scared that even the dope dealers were afraid to be out after 8 p.m. Okay, pause. I cannot talk and do eyebrows at the same time, so I'll be right back. It's funny, I can do my eyebrows quickly, but if I have to talk through them, it's a disaster. Can't do it. Okay, where was I? So the police have kind of started to connect the crimes, but also it's just a bad neighborhood, right? On March 17th, the stalker moved to a new neighborhood. He shifted over to Mount Pleasant, which kind of, it's like the next neighborhood over, but a little bit more northwest up towards the zoo. At this time, Mount Pleasant had already started to gentrify, right? It was comparatively upscale compared to Columbia Heights with really low crime. So March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, Hope Halleck was shot in the head by a passing car. She survived, lost an eye. Police then started to wonder if there was like a drug turf expansion or, maybe something more. So exactly 4 weeks after that very first shooting, the shotgun stalker struck again. This time it was 28-year-old Elizabeth Bessie Hudson, and she was walking alone, walking her dogs down an alley. This occurred on the far west end of Mount Pleasant, on the side that borders Rock Creek Park, far away from any typical drug or gang violence. Up until this point, police had not officially linked the crimes, but the media reported the crimes individually, and it wasn't until the similarities were kind of undeniable that they were officially connected. On April 4th, Lorinda Arrington was walking alone, approaching the corner of Holme Place and Monroe Street in Columbia Heights. The shooter approached her as she was walking across the street, and he said, "You remember me?" He pulled the trigger, and Lorinda brought her arm up to shield her face, which saved her life. The doctors were able to save her arm, although her elbow joint was destroyed. Her arm and the side of her face were riddled with shotgun pellets, but Linda survived, and she at the time was 5 months pregnant. So even though her poor arm is permanently disfigured and pretty mangled, she later says she was just happy to have both arms to hold her baby. In my research, there's some conflicting reports on what the shooter said to Miss Lorinda. The interview that I saw with her said that he was just like super intense and said, "You remember me?" and just looked at her like he was not messing around. But there was other reports that he said April Fool's. Well, he shot her on April 4th, and April Fool's Day is on April 1st. So I'm gonna go with maybe that was some creative reporting. Longtime activist and DC watchdog Dorothy Brazil, she had a meeting with the chief of police on the very night that Lorinda was shot. It was the afternoon after the meeting, so the next day, that she learned from an article in the Washington Post that a young woman was shot in Mount Pleasant, Bessie Hudson, right? And that police were connecting it to the series of shootings in Columbia Heights. Police never warned or alerted those community leaders, including Miss Brazil, that those murders, the shootings, were connected. You would think that the police would want to work with like neighborhood watch and community people to help solve the crime, right? Like no evidence was provided, car description, tag number, description of the person, none of that. So media is all over this, right? And it was around this time that Miss Sheryl was contacted by media. A reporter wanted to like embed in the neighborhood to do like a day in the life of what it's like to be in this like crazy, scary neighborhood. So they called, you know, and Sheryl was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm planning a big party, big spring party, any excuse to have a party. Bless. You know, it was just one day, you know, they just sort of followed them around and nothing really happened. And it was about a week later that, spoiler alert, they caught the guy. So once the authorities finally did start to share information, it was pretty broad, right? So they were telling people, stay home, don't walk alone at night. The chief of police eventually did visit the neighborhood. Somebody drove him in a car and he wore a bulletproof vest. He didn't speak to anyone, but the mayor finally showed up but didn't engage as much as she should have, right? It showed the community that their own leadership was scared and that they should be scared too. Well, Sheryl was just living her best life, planning a party. Most of the victims were black. They happened in areas that had drug-related crime issues, and it was just assumed in the eyes of the community that the police just thought the victims, you know, had put themselves in harm's way, that they must have been involved in some other kind of illicit activity that put them at risk. So it wasn't really until Bessie Hudson had been murdered in Mount Pleasant that police were like, oh, okay, maybe this needs a little bit more attention. I mean, that's just so shitty, right? Mount Pleasant and Columbia Heights were rightfully so outraged. They were having town hall meetings and they were so largely attended that they had to be held outside. They were just like pissed, right? Why is it taking police so long to connect these crimes? Obviously. Anyways, finally descriptions are being shared and publicized, right? So police have shared through the media to watch out for a 1990 bluish-green Toyota Tercel with a dark driver's side door, paper tags in the rear window, and the Washington Post published the composite sketch of the suspect. They also advertised a $25,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest of what the media was calling the shotgun stalker. He was described as a black male in his late 20s, early 30s, with sharp angular features and of course assumed to live nearby. On April 10th, the stalker returned again to Holmead Place in Columbia Heights and he shot at 3 pedestrians. Never like groups of people, I mean like 3 times that one day, shot at 3 people. One of them was killed, 35-year-old Edward Fleming. Then, on April 19th, 2 full months after things had first started, Columbia Heights was hit again by the shotgun stalker, and this time it happened in broad daylight. 3 different pedestrians were shot at that day, even as nearly every street corner was being patrolled by Metro Police. So the 3rd person shot on April 19th was the 15th attack. It ended up being the 4th homicide, 61-year-old Nello Hughes. This eye is kind of just looking like a really gross bruise, and you know what? I'm into it. It's gonna come together, okay. April 19th was actually a beautiful spring day, cherry blossoms in bloom, sunshine. It was just really a lovely day. And Kenneth Stewart, a Metro police officer who was off duty that day, decided he was gonna wash his cars. So he washed his police cruiser, and then he decided he was gonna go ahead and wash his personal vehicle. Remember, it's his day off, so he got into it and drove it back to the car wash on the corner of Kenyon and Sherman Avenue. Well, that's where he was when he noticed there was a blue Toyota Tercel. It was approaching from behind, and then he saw the car run the red light. His little spidey senses started to go off, right? Now he's in his own private car, so he honestly can't do a whole lot. But remember, there's police everywhere, so he flagged down, a police cruiser that was nearby and was like, yo, I think that's the shotgun stalker. Cover me. So Kenneth Stewart, and the other officer pretty much kind of like sandwiched the Tercel, right? So he couldn't go anywhere, because I'm sure he certainly tried. And he had a reason to pull him over because he saw him run that red light. And by the way, anyone with a blue Tercel in Washington, D.C. was getting pulled over these days. So they get him out of the car, get him in handcuffs. He said that the guy was just like total, just creep vibes, right? Just really uneasy kind of vibes. While Kenneth was apprehending the driver of the Tercel, the other officer discovered on the seat a shotgun that was still warm. What they didn't know was that it was still warm because Nello Hughes had just been murdered a couple blocks away. All right, blue Toyota Tercel and a hot shotgun in the car. The driver was arrested and identified as 29-year-old James E. Swan Jr. of New Jersey. The investigators, the police, they wanted to be really, really careful with this because, the attacks seemed to be so random. They wanted to get it right. Also, they arrested a man who didn't live nearby. How could a person who lives so far away be doing these crimes in this way? Where the fuck is the fucking pencil? Oh my god, goodness. All these lip liners in here. What the fuck is it? Where's the Louise? Oh my god. I'm searching for the pencil that I already pulled out. Wow, I'm incredible. Okay, so police have apprehended Swan. It is very clear that he's not playing with a full deck. Very much mentally ill. He was not a rational person. And then coupled with the way that the crimes occurred so randomly, this was not a healthy man. Former neighbors described him as a weirdo who used to pace up and down the sidewalk and yell at squirrels. Investigators learned that Mr. Swan had shown signs of mental illness for many years, but he was largely, overlooked by society and had not received any kind of treatment. The shotgun that was found in Swan's car was actually purchased legally a year earlier. They learned that Swan was living in New Jersey and he would drive down from New Jersey to seek out people in Washington, D.C. to kill, and he would sometimes sleep in his car. It's kind of wild to think about that if James Swan had not been by chance intercepted that day by luck, it's really no telling how many more victims there would have been or how long it would have gone on. I wonder if I could use this inner corner highlight as face highlight. Would that be crazy? Probably, right? Let's see if I could just ruin everything. Okay, so in interviews with psychiatrists, the doctors, they were trying to determine if he was mentally fit to stand the trial. Swan told doctors that he was hearing voices. He called them the chastisements. He said the voices were commanding him to shoot people in Northwest Washington, D.C. James Swan said that he spoke to the spirits of creation. He saw angels, spirits, demons, forces that were occupying his body and telling him that Northwest DC was occupied by the civil rights people responsible for the assassination of Malcolm X. Further, he said that if he disobeyed, they would pierce his heart and explode his brain painfully and slowly. The voices were all-consuming, and they would only let up for a few days after he had committed a murder. James Swan was seen by 8 different doctors in total, and they all agreed that he was paranoid schizophrenic, profoundly psychotic, and was legally insane. So they know that it was James Swan, but he is cuckoo banana crackers. He's on a different planet, okay? Swan did not stand trial, but there was a hearing to decide what to do. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. There was a criminal hearing held on September 27th of 1994. The presiding judge did order James Swan to essentially be committed to the maximum security unit of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which, FYI, is the first federally owned psychiatric hospital in the United States. Other notable residents include James Hinckley, tried to assassinate President Reagan, remember? How shiny are those lips? Holy shit. I wonder if I could put some of this on my eye. Thomas Hudson, the father of Bessie Hudson, would write letters to James Swan every year on the anniversary of Bessie's death. It was more of like a journal or therapy for himself, but on the 4th anniversary, Mr. Hudson wanted James Swan to actually receive the letters. He said that he wanted the death penalty and he wanted to do it himself. He no longer wishes harm to James Swan and doesn't wish anyone else to harm him either. So James E. Swan currently remains hospitalized in the medium security unit of St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Doctors have noted that Swan has not had a psychotic episode or any aggression tendencies since about 2003. His aggression has all but disappeared, I guess. But all of the petitions for his release have been denied, citing the obvious threat to others and to himself. If Swan is ever found to be no longer mentally ill, he will be released unconditionally. So that is the story of the Shotgun Stalker. Thank you again to Sheryl for recommending this story and for also sharing her personal connection with it. I really appreciate that. Thank you. All of the makeup that I used on my face will be listed down in the description box, so just check down there for all the information. All of the good stuff is always down in the description box. Thanks so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today if you are not already. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on most of the other social channels. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Shake it up. Ooh, ooh. February 22nd. What did I say? Let me start over. Hi. I'm getting hot. Are my lips even? No. I don't know if this is the right vibe, you guys. It's not funny. Who?
Yeah, Christmas.
Betty and Tony? Yeah. Is it one of those mega deluxe triple folds?
Yeah, you know it.
She always writes these really fun captions.
A year to remember.
Oh, Lord. Or forget. Betty.